Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. The topic for this particular discussion is to look at the alternative models that economists have derived to represent differing degrees of competition that the firm may in fact be facing in the marketplace. In reality, as I've said to you actually in the very first lecture, the degrees of competition are a continuum from an extremely competitive situation all the way up to the least competitive situation. And what economists have done is to take four snapshots along the way and build those as economic models that show what takes place when you have those degrees of competition. So I've put up four different demand curves, and what I'm doing is I'm representing the number of substitutes by looking at differing degrees of elasticity. So in the first, and then the name, and so in this case, there's not many close substitutes. In fact, the monopoly model says you're the only firm in the entire industry. And then you have a case where there are a few firms, 5, 6, 7, that produce the majority of the output for that industry. And then you have some cases called monopolistic competition where there are a lot of differentiated products. And I'll talk about paper towels as an example of that. And finally, you have the very most competitive case, which you all recall is called perfect competition. And that firm has no market power. So as we move in this direction, we're looking at the firm facing increasing degrees of competition. And then as we move in this direction, we're talking about increasing degrees of what's called market power. Power. The term market power means the ability to charge a price above marginal cost. So as the firm acquires more and more market power, moving towards the left on our continuum, the ratio of price to marginal cost would increase. The fewer close substitutes there are, the more market power the firm in fact has. So the name of these four models are number one, the monopoly model. Mono means one, so that is the least competitive market structure. And you might want to put in parenthesis benchmark because the assumption is that the firm faces no competition. Well, as I've said to you over and over again, every firm faces competition. Everything's a matter of degree. So the monopoly model is like this benchmark at the end of the spectrum. The firm's demand curve is the industry demand curve. The term oligopoly refers to a market, as I just indicated, where there are a few firms that dominate the marketplace. In electric utilities, there are four companies that manufacture the meters that go on the back of your house, and they have like 95% of the market. These four firms, and so electric companies buy from them. So each of them has a large market share and does not face a lot of competition. What's interesting about it is that if you're an electric company, remember that you can pass on through your rates any cost that you incur. It's a managed public utility, so they're not very price sensitive, but they're extremely quality sensitive because think about it. If you have a meter that goes bad, whatever it goes bad with, either measures wrong or it stops working or whatever the case may be, whoever the customer is going to be really upset about it. And as a regulated utility, the one thing you want to avoid is complaints made to the Public Utilities Commission, because those are the people who regulate you, right? And so you want to avoid that. Consequently, demand's relatively inelastic for each of these sellers, and it's impossible for a new firm to enter because of this risk of quality in the marketplace. And they have very similar products, and their prices are in fact very similar. If there are two firms in the marketplace, it's called a duopoly, which is a subset of oligopoly. And my favorite is Duracell and is it Energizer? Is that the other major producer? And they have like 85% of the marketplace. When you buy new devices, you may get Korean batteries that come with it, right? And then Kirkland sells alkaline batteries also. But as I said, the majority is made up of these two companies. Both of them advertise that they are the best in the industry, and they can't both be the best, but actually they can be. Duracell has the best shelf life for batteries, and that is that they'll maintain a charge in your flashlight in the drawer for a longer period of time. Energizer has the best sustained energy generation. In other words, if you're using it like in a toy or an electric device, and you want to just keep using it, right? Energizer can put out a longer steady stream of power in that use, and then Duracell a longer lifespan in the drawer. But they're very, very competitive with each other. Monopolistic competition is where there are several firms producing differentiated products. And my favorite example of this is paper towels. If you go into the grocery store, particularly people from Europe or Asia go into the United States grocery store, and they're overwhelmed by the choices because literally there's like a half an aisle of paper towels to choose from, right? There are all these differentiated products. You have Ralph's paper towels that are white and they are on a cardboard roll, and they're like 79 cents. And then you move up, and then they come in pastel colors. And then you move up, and you get the absorbent paper towel. Who is that? Go ahead. Bounty. Good. And what's their catchphrase in advertising? Bounty is the. Why do you know that? What? I know. I've been teaching this for 30 years, and every year. My students know that phrase, right? Or somebody knows the phrase. It was probably that the original ads had this horrible woman's voice who was saying it, so it sticks in your mind. And then so now you're up to about $1.10 in the absorbency, and then you get the strongest paper towels. Who is that? The strongest paper towels. Brawny, good. And Brawny has ads like they'll show a wet paper towel, and you can carry a dozen hard-boiled eggs in a wet paper towel, which I've never desired to do. It's not a function that I really am looking for. Their other ads have this poor woman's in the kitchen, and she puts her hand on a Brawny towel, and her arm turns into like Mr. Clean, and it pulls her all around the kitchen cleaning devices. And so they're up at the upper end. And then you get to the super expensive, and those are absorbent and strong. And they have decorations on the towels, and then some of them have philosophical sayings like "Have a nice day" or "Buy a brownie from a brownie" or other things like that. So there are all these different degrees of product differentiation in the marketplace. Yeah, I'll come back to it. Good. And then perfect competition, we know, is the model of the most competitive construct that economists could come up with, that a firm could be operating in. So again, regard this as a benchmark, because nothing is perfect, as I've said to you over and over again. The assumptions are, number one, there are many, many buyers and sellers. So everybody, there's like thousands of buyers and thousands of sellers. The reason that assumption is there is that we want to describe a situation where any one buyer cannot affect market price if he or she buys a lot or doesn't buy. And the same thing's true of every seller. Every seller is such a small part of the marketplace that if they produce as much as they could, or they don't produce anything, the market price will not change. Y'all with me? Good. The actual mathematical model is an infinite number of buyers and sellers when you do the mathematical equations and stuff. So that's the first assumption. Lots and lots of buyers and sellers. Secondly, the products are identical once they get to market. Once the product gets to market, they are what are called homogeneous. Homo meaning one. So as I said, once they get to market, the buyer would not be able to determine who the seller actually was because the products are all identical. The markets that come closest to these assumptions are the markets for agricultural products, grain, wheat, corn, AAA hard hull winter wheat. AAA is a grading standard by the U.S. government. And so when wheat is produced, then it's evaluated for quality, and then it's standardized as AAA, AA, or whatever the quality may be. So as I said, once your products have gotten to market, your wheat, it's indistinguishable from everybody else's. They're identical substitutes in that particular case. The third assumption is there is no cost of attaining accurate information. Zero information cost is the way it's sometimes phrased. And what it means is that buyers know exactly what the quality is, they know exactly what the price is, they know where it's available, and so they have the knowledge without any hesitation of knowing specifically exactly the quality and what the prices are in fact. Sellers, it applies to both sides of the market. Sellers all know the current technology of production. They all have the same level of knowledge about what's the best way to produce this particular product. And they know what market prices are, and they know what the schedules are, and so forth. Farmers get up at 4 a.m. and they listen to Farmers Radio. And Farmers Radio broadcasts every day the current futures market price for their product. So farmers often sell their product before they've even produced it with a contract to deliver it in October when it's done. And they sell it now so they can get the money to use that to buy fertilizer and seed and so forth. So as I said, the assumption is they have perfect knowledge of the means of production, the technology, and where the market is and what the market price is going to be. The fourth assumption is that firms can freely enter into production or freely leave production with no change in fixed cost. So there's free entry and free exit. Again, going to agriculture, there is a great deal of knowledge that farmers have about the various things we've talked about. They all subscribe to the latest journals about whatever their products are. Cal State, is it Sacramento? Is there a Cal State Sacramento? I think that's the one. Specializes in agricultural research, and so they have journals and they publish articles about the latest findings and so forth. And then as I said, everybody knows what market stuff is because that's they're big markets. And then again, a farmer could easily switch from planting wheat to planting corn, or planting soybeans, or planting other things. You just buy different seeds, right? You have your tractors, you have your irrigation equipment, you have the land, and so forth. So it's very easy to enter or exit the production of any one particular product. Good. So looking at the situation for the firm in an industry which is in perfect competition, and we also call this a price taker firm, Price is determined by the total interaction of market demand and market supply. So that supply curve represents the production of thousands and thousands of farms. And that demand represents the willingness to buy of thousands and thousands of manufacturers of cattle feed and bakery products and all the things that use these particular grains. So the market price is established. Let's say it's established at $1 per bushel. When we look at the firm, we draw the demand as horizontal, which seems strange, right? But don't think about it that way. Think about it this way. That market price comes in as a piece of information. And then no matter what rate he produces, he'll get $1 per bushel. Everybody with me? So no matter where you are along there, the price is going to be the same as marginal revenue because your production does not affect market price. That's why you end up with this construct of a horizontal demand curve. But it basically says no matter where you produce, price is the same as marginal revenue. You have no incentive. If you raise price at all, you will lose all your sales. You all with me? Because there are identical substitutes out there. And you have no incentive to lower price because you're able to get that price no matter where you choose to produce. So in determining the maximum profit rate of production, we compare how much a unit adds to revenue, that's the $1 all the way across, with my marginal cost curve, which is the additional cost of producing each additional unit. Farmers don't actually draw this on a unit basis. They would do the calculation based on acreages. So you might think about adding an acre to production, right? But it's the same general construct. So looking at it, if you think about it, if you produce at this rate here, you've maximized the difference between marginal revenue and marginal cost. But all of these units add towards profitability because all of these units, all the way up to this point, the additional revenue is higher than the additional cost. So you'd want to produce all of those units because they're contributing towards profitability. But once you get to the rate of production where marginal revenue just matches marginal cost, that's the best you can possibly do. It's the best you can possibly do. Because look at it, if you go beyond that point, then the additional cost is above what you're selling it for. And it wouldn't make any sense to produce that. It's just a mathematical relationship if you think about it. Profit is total revenue minus total cost. So if an item adds more to the revenue than it adds to cost, it contributes towards positive profitability. Students will sometimes ask me, well, why would you produce that last unit? Because it adds the same to cost that it adds to profit. And the answer is, you're right, it doesn't matter if you produce the last unit. But what we're looking for is a shorthand way of solving for the rate that maximizes profit. And so that's why we go to that point. Producing less means you're not maximizing revenue. Producing more means your cost is going up more than that. So that's the best rate of output for the individual firm. In the short run, the production function of the firm is marginal cost above average variable cost. If you get marginal cost, if demand intersects below average variable cost, you're not taking in enough money to pay your production inputs. And then if you're below average cost, but you're above average variable cost, in the short run, you'd stay in business because you're covering some of your fixed cost. In the long run, you'd only produce if marginal cost is above average cost. And so the long run supply curve would be that upper portion of the marginal cost curve above average cost. So what I've drawn here is two graphs that demonstrate two intersections of graphs that demonstrate what's called long-run industry equilibrium. Long-run industry equilibrium. The market's in equilibrium because the quantity being produced matches the quantity being consumed. We're at PE and QE. And as long as those are the functions, there's no incentive for things to change. If demand changed, then of course you'd change the equilibrium. But this shows that the market's is in equilibrium. And then I've drawn the situation facing the firm such that price is the same as average cost. Price per unit is the same as average cost. And so consequently, again, you're producing where marginal cost equals marginal revenue, and any other rate would be less successful less successful than that rate of output. Notice something interesting though about this. Price times quantity is total revenue, so you can see it's that rectangle. And then average cost times quantity is total cost. And so you take the average, multiply by the number of units produced, you get total cost. So it demonstrates the firm is making zero economic profits. Zero economic profits. How does that sound? How does it sound? You're making zero profits. How are you doing? It doesn't sound good, right? But here's the key. Remember that economists include opportunity cost as part of average cost or as part of total cost. So what it means is that you're making as much here as you could make in your best alternative, your best other product. You're making as much profit as you could doing your second best alternative. So you are making an accounting profit. You're making some accounting profit, and that's called a normal rate of return. You're making the average of what all the firms in the industry are making. I mean, be the example. Your accountant you're a farmer, and your accountant comes out and he says, "You want to know what your profit is?" And he said, "Well, how much did you get and total revenue, and then what were your costs, explicit costs?" And he says, "Well, congratulations, you made $20,000, right? That's accounting profit." The economist would come along though and say, "What was your total revenue?" Okay, that's the same. And they would then they would say, "With these resources, what's the most you could have made with an alternative product? Instead of producing this wheat, suppose you'd produce corn. What could you have made?" Well, if that turns out to be $30,000, then the economist is going to say to you, "You lost $10,000. Y'all with me? Good. Because you're measuring different things, and that's critical to understanding economic analysis. Economic cost is the cost of the best alternative. So zero profit is not bad news. It's the normal situation. You're making an average rate of return. Good. So that's the perfect competition model. Now, going to the other end of the spectrum. Monopoly means one firm, and it exists when there are strong barriers to entry. Barriers to entry mean things that would prohibit other firms from entering into competition against you. And the firm faces a downward sloping demand curve because in order to sell more, you need to lower price. There are always alternatives to anything. So again, the firm would set their rate of production where marginal revenue equals marginal cost, because that's just mathematics to maximize total revenue minus total cost. So we want to evaluate what are some of the things that prevent competition from occurring in a particular marketplace. And incumbent means existing firms in the industry, and the existing firms may have certain advantages that make it difficult for new firms to come into production. Oh, and by the way, this analysis now does not only apply to the monopoly model, it also applies to oligopoly and monopolistic competition, because all of them face a downward sloping demand curve. Everybody with me? Right? There are matters of degree, like monopolistic competition. It's pretty elastic because there are a lot of different products that are there, but it's still downward sloping, and so some of these barriers may exist at varying degrees for any of these three models. Number one, the existing firms may own certain specific assets that are necessary for the production of this particular product. American Aluminum Company, Alcoa, number one, located their production facility close to the hydroelectric dam because the two key inputs to making aluminum are electricity and bauxite. And it takes a lot of electricity to make this into aluminum. And then you have to have bauxite as a major input. So number one, Alcoa located where they got really cheap power. And then they tried to buy up the bauxite mines and in order to prevent other firms from being able to do that. It's not usually very successful because we now have a worldwide market, and there are bauxite mines all over the world. And now with the transportation costs coming down dramatically, as we now have gigantic container ships that can go all over the world, not many firms, unless it were a geographic location, but not many firms can. This is not an impediment to most firms. What may exist, though, are what are called economies of scale in production. And if you recall the term, it has to do with expanding production while average cost is falling. That's what an economy of scale means, that as I increase my rate of production, my average cost is coming down because I'm spreading my fixed cost over more and more units of the good. So firms will sometimes purposely build in excess capacity, which is the next item, which is basically the same thing, in order to have substantial economies of scale. The reason that becomes a barrier to a new firm is that if you try to enter, I can lower my price, increase my production, and my average cost is going down. Even though I'm charging a lower price for revenue side, my total cost, my average cost is coming down. And so the existence of that will often prohibit somebody from considering entering into competition. During the following World War II, American geologists were evaluating the mineral content in the Middle East, and they discovered that that area of the world has a lot of oil under it, and most of it is under what are called pressure domes. And it means that the oil's down below, but there's all this pressure pushing in on the oil. So to get it out, all you need to do is put a straw in to it, and it pumps itself out. You all have seen the movies. It's called a gusher, right? They're drilling and drilling, and then the oil comes up. That's one form of them. Many other locations where it's not under pressure, as you know, you have the rocker arm that has to actually pull the oil up to get it out of the ground. So pressure domes are much cheaper as a means of producing oil. And so the American oil companies, the Seven Sisters, got in and colluded, and they divided up the Middle East by countries so they wouldn't compete against each other. So Texaco got Algeria, I think Exxon got Saudi Arabia, and they, okay, you go there and I'll go here, and we won't compete against each other. And these are guys from Texas, so they have the big Texas hats and the boots, and they're Texans. My sister's married to a Texan, so I know what Texans are, right? And they're bombastic, and it's okay. He's all right. He's a chemist though, so anyway, they went over to negotiate with the sheikhs, and they got over there, and the sheikhs are wearing these white outfits, right, with white shawls, and these Texans are like, what is this guy? So they started negotiating. They said, listen, we'd like to buy your oil. And the sheikh said, okay, but it's located in the center of my country, and there are no roads to get there. And the American firm said, well, we'll build the roads. And he said, okay, but there's no electricity to run the equipment to do the drilling. Well, we'll put in power lines and power generation. Oh, well, okay, but there's no way to get the oil from that location to the coast. Well, we'll put in a pipe. We'll put in a pipeline. Well, okay, but we have no ports that are sufficient to bring your big tanker ship. Oh, we'll build the ports. We'll build the ports. So the sheikh said, oh, well, okay, and they negotiated a 20-year contract and a price and so forth. So American firms put in literally hundreds of millions of dollars of investment in these countries. But remember, it's in their country, right? Which means that government has the property rights. The government, it's on their land, is my point. It's not in the United States where you're defended by the courts. So the sheikhs made all these agreements, and they built all these facilities. And then the sheikhs in Algeria went to Texaco, and they said, we've just nationalized all the production facilities. So they no longer belong to you. They belong to the people of Algeria, which means the government of Algeria. And Texaco said, oh, no, you can't do that. You can't do that. We have a contract with the sheikh. No, you had a contract with Sheikh Mohammed, but he's no longer here. Sheikh John is here now. So now we'll renegotiate the price of oil. So all these smart guys in their suits were not that smart, and so forth. But the interesting point I'm making is that Saudi Arabia had a contract with Exxon, and they decided to invest in twice the capacity that they anticipated producing. so that they would have excess capacity. And so they're able to produce, they were able to produce twice as rapidly and ship it to the coast twice as rapidly, another bigger pipeline going to the coast. So they were purposely building in excess capacity for the future. If you're an oil company, how would you decide, what would be your desire about how rapidly to take the oil out? If you're an oil company, you don't own it until it's 12 miles off the coast. Y'all with me? As long as it's on their territory, you don't have property rights to it. You don't have it until you're 12 miles out, which is the normal international limit, which has been extended to 100 miles in some cases. But you don't own the oil until it gets out there in the sea. And so consequently, your desire is to get the oil out as quickly as you can. Y'all with me? Because it's not yours until you have it and it's out of that particular area. But the other side of it is that you're in competition with the other oil producers and so oil sellers. So if you're all doing that, then the oil is produced very rapidly and you get a very low price because everybody's producing a large quantity. So as you know, those countries then eventually got together and formed OPEC, which is the Organization of Petroleum Exporting Countries, made up of 7 countries in that particular region, and decided that they would reduce output and, in fact, get a higher price. And in 1979, they reduced output a lot, and prices went up a lot in the United States, and then there were shortages because we put price controls on. And so forth. The reason Saudi Arabia wanted excess capacity was that when you have collusion like that, there's a tendency for other people to cheat. And think about it. If you all agree on the price, and then you have to divide up the output amongst the nations. So, you're going to cut back 10%, you're going to cut back 12%, whatever the case may be. If you know everybody else is selling, at $50 a barrel, if you can sell at $49 a barrel, the demand is almost infinite, right? Because your product's identical to theirs, pretty much adjusting for differences in quality. And so there's a tendency for these member states to cheat and produce more than what they've agreed to. And it's almost impossible, it is impossible for other members to monitor how much you're selling because it gets shipped out in these big tankers and you don't know how much is being shipped or what's being shipped. Whatever. So Saudi Arabia knew as a leader that they could cut back by a larger amount to offset the cheating that was taking place so as to keep the market price up in that manner. Existing firms have reputational effects because they've been in the market. Buyers know the quality of the product, and so it's hard for new firms to come in to overcome that existing reputation. Kleenex was one of the first companies to manufacture facial tissues, and Kleenex is the brand name, and I've forgotten who the company was, but they advertised a lot, and Kleenex was the only guy on the market for a long time, and so consequently, people started calling a facial tissue a Kleenex, right? It's a Kleenex. Another company in competition named their product a Kleenex. And they were sued by Kleenex by saying, no, you can't do that because that's our brand name and so forth. And they argued that the word Kleenex had become a vernacular in the language that meant facial tissue, and therefore they should be able to call it that. And the courts ruled in Kleenex's favor because they said Kleenex invested a lot of money in building that brand name, and that brand name is valuable to them, and so you can't call yours Kleenex. So existing firms often have a reputational advantage. Existing firms may also have formed pre-commitment contracts with distributors downstream or with producers upstream, with suppliers upstream. And so in doing that, it's like owning a specific asset. You can lock out other people from competing for that. General Electric makes nuclear power plants, although they don't anymore. In fact, nobody does anymore. There's an article in this week's Economist that Toshiba owns a subdivision called Westinghouse, and they were producing four nuclear power plants in the southeastern United States, and they are so far over budget and behind schedule. They thought that this new design would be easier to build, and it wasn't. And then they had hired a particular contractor, and they didn't realize how specific the regulations are, and so that the welds were wrong, and they just did a $6 billion write-down because these plants are not coming online successfully. In any case, General Electric used to manufacture nuclear power plants, and one of the inputs to making nuclear power is called palladium, which is a form of uranium, and so they looked at the future, and by the way, the other major buyer were manufacturers of automobile mufflers that also used palladium, and so they looked at the potential production of it and anticipated future demand for it, and decided that it was a critical asset. And so they signed a 20-year requirements contract with a specified price for the next 20 years. So they locked in the supply, and they were really excited about doing it. About 2 years later, there was a technological breakthrough in the production of the mufflers, and they were now able to produce mufflers using only 1/3 of the amount of palladium that they had before. And then secondly, there were all these new finds of palladium in Africa and so forth. They lost like $18 billion on that risk because they didn't hedge the bet. If you lock in to promise to pay that, you want to lock in a contract to promise to sell it, so that you're protected from changes in price, and it's called hedging. So they didn't do that. And then obviously, as you know, licenses and patents are laws that restrict the degree of competition. Every liquor store has to have a liquor license from the state, and the state has established certain geographic densities of liquor stores that is acceptable. And so once an area has the number of licenses that the state says is saturation, you can't get a license to sell liquor in that area. What you have to do is buy a license from somebody who's already there. So clearly it restricts competition. And then patents, as you know, are a legal system where you are granted the sole right to produce a product for 20 years, and no one can duplicate that if it is a patentable product. In order to get a patent, you have to, number one, demonstrate that it produces value. So it has to be something that you can say customers get value by buying this particular product. Two, it has to be unique. It has to be something that has not been done before. The other phrase is it has to be non-obvious. It can't be somebody that anybody would say, yeah, that's what you want to do. Guys who do blueprints learned a long time ago that to make a steady line, you actually rotate the pencil. You draw it across the paper. You don't push it. You draw it across and you rotate the pencil, which gives you an even graphite line there. Well, you can't patent that because everybody knows how to do it, and it's obvious in that way. So it has to be unique. It has to be valuable. And it has to be non-obvious. There's two more I can't remember. But anyway, if you meet all these requirements, then you're granted a patent. And as I said, that's enforceable by law. And the reason for doing that is to stimulate the investment in risky investigations of new products. It was put in place, as I said, to guarantee a profit stream if you succeed in producing something that actually meets all those criteria. It's brand new, you discovered it, you're the only one who makes it, and so forth. Pharmaceuticals are patented. They do not have a 20-year period. They have a 7 or a 9-year effective period. And the reason for doing it is that the discovery of drugs is extremely difficult and extremely costly. And so So the drug companies invest literally billions of dollars in trying to find new pharmaceutical products that will solve human ailments. If you were trying to decide, and the body has all kinds, the population has all kinds of different potential problems for the body. So if you were a pharmaceutical company, what kind of a problem would you want to investigate? What kind of a problem? Okay. Right, right. Because then nobody else is going to have anything yet. Good. You want to maximize profit. Profit, total revenue is price times quantity. So you want to address an issue that's affecting what? A lot of people. Good, because that means a lot of people would buy it. The common cold is extremely common. And every year, these companies come out with new over-the-counter remedies for the cold. The one that became popular about probably 7 or 8 years ago was zinc as in the product, and Zicam, I think that's the name. Zicam came out, and initially it was a spray, and the beauty of their marketing was that if you use this when you just think you're getting a cold, then it will reduce the length of time by 2 days or by some significant amount. But you have to catch it right at the very beginning. Well, the beauty of that is if you sneeze, you may not have a cold, right? But you may think you have a cold. And so they had really great sales because people were using it, right? And then when they didn't get a cold, they would think, oh, it works, right? So very, very successful in that one. Good. Oh, I'm sorry. So number one, you'd want to get a problem that's very commonplace. You also want to get a problem that's really serious, that like people die from, right? Because then they're willing to pay a lot of money, right, not to die. And the pandemic was AIDS that came along, that came out of Africa, and nobody had seen it before, and it was deadly. And we finally got AZT, I think it is, as a medication for it. But last year there were still 23 different medications in the process of being developed to try and solve that particular problem. But that's the reason you want to guarantee them a profit stream, so they'll undertake this really risky investment. Third, or whatever we're on, existing firms have learning curve effects, and that is if you've been doing something for a period of time, you've probably figured out better ways to do it. In manufacturing, 80% of the discoveries in production come from the production floor, from the guys actually doing the production, because those are the people who figure out, wow, if I could only do it this way, I could do it much faster, or I could do it, more easily. During World War II, we had a lot of firms producing everything from tanks to bombers and planes and so forth. And when you were putting the planes together, you're using titanium bolts, and you have to take the nut and get it lined up on the other side, and then put the bolt through the two pieces of metal, and then tighten it up, holding the nut constant. This guy came up with a very simple device. It was a piece of pipe in which the nut would just fit, right? Good. And then he put a spring at the bottom of it, and then he put a lip on the front of it, so you could put in a whole bunch of the nuts, and then it would stick out just a little bit. So now you're not fumbling with the nuts in the back. You have this thing, you just hold it back there. Your bolt goes in and locks and connects with it, and then you can do it much more quickly. So fascinating. Learning effects can be exceptional. Did I talk about painting grills? When I was a college student, I went to work one summer for a sheet metal fabrication. I went to work for a fabricator who was a customer of my father, who had his own business, and so I was the college kid, and all the guys there were all blue-collar workers, right? And they hated me, right? Smarty pants. And so they gave me a job of spray painting these grills that are, like that at an angle, that go behind the glass in china cabinets. Y'all with me, right? You know, there's the glass, and then right behind it, there's this gold, whatever it is. So he took me in the paint shop, and he said, you hang it down, and then you shoot it from this direction and let it dry, because they were all curled. And then you have to shoot it from this direction, let it dry, and then shoot it from this direction, and then that direction, and then it's complete. And then you take it and put it, and then you get another one. So I did like three of them that way, and it was just boring as hell, because most of the time you're just sitting there. So what I did is, in the paint shop, I got this long rope, and I tied this rope all the way across the paint shop, and then I hung like 10 of these things in a row, and then I got the spray paint and put a long cord on it, right, the power sprayer. So I could get back here, and I could just turn it on, and I could just walk down, spraying them until I got to the end. By then, those are dry, so you walk back and spray them in this direction. Then you wait. Then you spray them all in this direction. Then you spray them all in that direction, and you're done, right? So I finished the job in about a day, and he had it scheduled for like 5 days. And I went to the guy and said, you know, I finished painting the grills. He said, no, you haven't. I said, yeah, I have. He said, we didn't do it right then. So he came out, and he was you know, that's impossible, right? And then he looked at them, and they were all done correctly. And so he was pissed. And, of course, the other guys hated me because I was a rate breaker, right? Because I found ways to do things more quickly. And so he assigned me the next 3 days. My job was to clean up the paint shop of all the junk that was all over him and so forth. So that's not to show how smart Professor Tantz is, although it was pretty clever. But and you've all done this, I know. You've been given a task to do. You've started out, and then you said, this doesn't make any sense. Why don't I put the collator over here, and then it'd be much easier. So there are substantial learning curve effects that may benefit incumbents. And then if you are the pioneering brand like Kleenex, obviously you have advantages because your name is associated with the overall product category in that particular way. So each firm faces a downward sloping demand curve, and we know that price times quantity gives me total revenue. But I'm interested in the marginal revenue, the additional revenue each unit is generating. And I noticed that in order to sell the additional units, I have to lower the price on existing units. So to get marginal revenue, I would look at the change in total revenue. At $10, I sell 1, so I get $10. I lower my price to 9, I sell 2, which is $18. The change in total revenue is 8. Y'all with me? Good. I got 9 extra dollars, but I gave up $1 on that first unit that I used to sell for 10. Lower the price to 8. 3 8s are 24, so the marginal revenue is 6, from 18 to that. So I can derive marginal revenue as a height above each additional unit. And it's the same as price for the first unit. And then, as you saw, for the second unit, it was $8. For the third, it was 6. For the fourth, it was 4. And for the fifth, it was 2. And then, if you lower price from $6 to 5, at $6 I sold 5. That was $30. I lower my price to 5. I sell 6. That's also $30. So for that unit, marginal revenue is 0. It doesn't go up. And in fact, if I get below that price, then marginal revenue is actually negative. If I get below the point where you've hit unitary elasticity, then marginal revenue is actually negative. So the shortcut, and so here's the table, which we just did with the graph, which is much easier to see. But you'll notice that in the upper area, marginal revenue is positive. That's the elastic region of demand, because lowering price brings in more dollars of revenue. Then you get to unitary elastic, that's between 5 and 6. And then you're now in the inelastic range of the demand curve, because lowering price in that area reduces total revenue. So the shortcut to draw the graph is draw the straight line demand. Marginal revenue is the same as price for the first unit. It's equal to 0 at the midpoint of the demand function. And then below that, it is negative. And so it matches up with the elastic region, it's positive. Unitary, it's 1, it's 0. And in the inelastic region, it would be, in fact, negative. The conclusion you want to put in your notes is then the firm will always operate in the elastic portion of the demand curve. Any individual firm would never knowingly operate if demand is inelastic, because they could raise price, get more money in, and reduce total cost. Y'all with me? If you're inelastic, if the buyers are inelastic, I can raise price, and it increases the amount of money coming in, and I don't produce as many units, which lowers total cost. So it's automatically profitable to do. So the firm would never knowingly produce in the inelastic range. The demand for a product category can be inelastic, as we talked about last time, like gasoline as a product. But for the individual firm, you're always going to price where marginal revenue is negative, because you're going to choose the rate of production where marginal revenue just matches marginal cost of production. So now you'll notice the difference between this outcome and the outcome for the price taker firm. Price taker, remember, demand was constant. That was marginal revenue. You produced up to the point where marginal revenue matched price, and that was the best you could possibly do. You do the same thing here, except now we notice that price is above marginal cost. Price is going to be above marginal cost if demand is downward sloping. So consequently, the firm has market power of some amount once demand is downward sloping. You have some degree of market power. In the case of the, quote, monopoly, where demand is more inelastic or is more inelastic, the firm has the ability to charge a high price relative to marginal cost. My example is the sale of the Windows operating system by Microsoft. If you want to buy that to install on a new computer that you have built, it's about $250 to buy the actual operating system. You all know even upgrading is like $90, right? Or some number like that, even existing users. So then stop and think about the marginal cost to Microsoft of producing one more disk. Well, there's the cost of the CD, that's 2 cents maybe. There's the cost of burning the information onto it, maybe that's 2 cents. There's the cost of the plastic box, maybe that's 2 cents. And then there's the cost of the tricolor picture that's inside. Maybe that's 2 cents. So that's 2, 4, 6. So the marginal cost is like 8 cents, and they're charging $200 for it. They clearly have market power. Y'all with me? They have a lot of market power. But here's the key. Do not confuse market power with monopoly profits. Do not confuse the fact that you have a high ratio of price to marginal cost with profitability, because profits come from price minus average cost, which includes fixed cost. Y'all with me? So when you think about Microsoft, yeah, the marginal cost is like 8 cents, but the actual cost of production includes millions and millions of dollars of reprogramming and trying stuff out, and it doesn't work, and then designing it, expensive coders and engineers, etc. So market power does not tell you about profitability, and even monopoly power does not tell you the firm is in fact profitable. Here's a case where there are a few close substitutes. We might call this the oligopoly model. My girlfriend's birthday was coming up, and she wanted to get a purse, and she wanted to get a handbag. And so we went to Coach handbags, which you all know about, very nice quality. And they had a little bag that was like a log, and it had big leather stitching, and the color was rouge, and it had big gold clips, and so I turned the price tag over, and it was $800. This little bag is $800, right? So I said, honey, Macy's carries nice handbags. Why don't we shop at Macy's? So we went to Macy's, and sure enough, they had a bag that was similar to that. It was log shape, and it was rose was the color, and it had gold handles and stuff, and the price tag was $400. So this is my example where it looked to me like for Coach, they were charging $800, and I saw a very similar product for sale at $400. So it looked to me like it was a 2-to-1 ratio, right, in that one. And I said to her, Target sells handbags. Why don't we look there? All right. So he went to Target, and they had a bag, and it was a log-shaped bag, and it was red, right? You went from rouge to rose to red, and it was made of pleather, which is pretend leather, and it was for sale like $79 or something like that. So what did she get? What bag did she get?
After you took her to Target, probably the Coach.
Absolutely the Coach, right? I'm not stupid, right? So she was excited. So that's my example. When you have a few other producers of similar products, but you are differentiated, maybe price is twice marginal cost. If you look at the price to marginal cost ratio of a product like Starkist tuna, the little 3-ounce can of tuna, there's very little market power because, number one, there are all these other brands that are there. There's Chicken of the Sea. Who came up with that name, right? Bumblebee tuna, right? And so the markup of price to marginal cost is very small. It's actually about 3 cents per can at retail. And so they don't have much market power because there are lots of very similar substitutes, but they have some degree of market power. Good. And then finally, we got to the price taker model we talked about before. That firm has no market power at all. Price is the same as marginal cost in that case. The calculation we make to actually measure market power is called the Lerner index. The Lerner index. And it's the ratio of price minus marginal cost, which means you're looking at the markup, divided by price. The range is going to be somewhere between 0 and 1 as you calculate that way. So going back to look at this situation, price is this whole height, marginal cost is this, so price minus marginal cost is this up here, and then divide that by price, and it looks like it's about 50%, right? This amount divided by that amount looks like the index would be about 50%. The higher the index, the more the market power of the firm. For the price taker, it's 0 because price minus marginal cost is 0 in that case. And then here you could see it would be a much bigger number. It would be like 5 or something like that. Price minus divided by price minus marginal cost gives price minus marginal cost divided by price gives you that number. Good. So the question that I was addressing before is, don't be confused about market power versus profitability. Profit is price minus average cost. And average cost could be anywhere along there. It could be down here. It could intersect marginal cost up there. It's a totally different data set from the demand and marginal revenue function. So there's no guarantee of making positive profits. If the firm is making positive economic profits, it means you're making a rate of return above and beyond what other firms are making. Y'all with me? It means other firms are earning 10%, you're earning 15%, right? And that's the incentive for firms to try and copy what you're doing. That's the incentive for firms to try and copy what you're doing. I won't make this too long a story, but in the 1950s, we had microwave transmitters, which we still have today. And the transmitter is about the size of this room. And if you go downtown and look on top of the buildings, you'll see these big rectangles. And if you look 5 miles away, there's another one facing it. And we actually can move data between those riding on the microwaves, which I just have no way of understanding. I can understand lots. I can't understand. And my friend said, well, it's a wave, and then you put, no. And it's like 10,000 simultaneous transmissions going on and that way. So this engineer was down in the lab, and he was looking at a new microwave vacuum tube. And by the way, at that time, all the transmitters were made of vacuum tubes because this was a long time ago. And it was on the workbench, and he had the guy turn it on, and the guy was describing what it does and so forth. And he said, okay, that's fine. And then he went back up to his office, and he took a Hershey's chocolate bar out of his pocket, and it was partially melted. And this guy's an engineer, so he's like curious about things, right? So I've worn this jacket a lot, and I've had Hershey bars in that pocket a lot, and it's never been melted before. Where was I? I was down in the lab. So he went out and bought a small bag of popping corn. This is a true story. And he went back to the technician in the lab, and he set the bag up next to the vacuum tube, and you can imagine the technician, right? Like, and they turned it on, and the technicians there like, I don't know. And sure enough, a couple kernels popped. And he realized that microwaves were in fact generating heat within the product and could in fact be used for cooking. And these things sold for like $850,000, the transmitter, which would be millions in today's dollars, right? I mean, they were extremely expensive things. At the next board meeting, he was reporting to the board, and he suggested that maybe they could make microwave transmitters to cook food. And all the board members are like, this is absurd, right? And it was absurd. You know, $800,000 to cook something. But as you all know, we went from there, we went to transistors, and we went from transistors to chips, and finally the cost of the transmitter was coming down, and the ability to produce them was smaller and smaller until it became feasible to make a device that would actually cook food, a microwave oven. Then they had to figure out how to do it. Number one, they had to figure out how to build the little transmitter. And then, like, what power level do I use? And then do I use intermittent, or, how do I cook the food? One of the first things they tried to cook was an egg, right? What happened? Exploded, right? Good. Oh, that's not going to work. So to make this not go on forever, they finally were able to make successful. And they had to convince the public that it was safe. And this was in the late 50s or mid 60s. No, in the 70s. And people were scared to death of this thing because it was invisible rays, like X-rays, that are cooking food. And they put a demonstration unit at North Campus at UCLA, and it had the regular dispenser, you put money in and pull out a sandwich. And then it had this box, and it had buttons that said croissant or ham and cheese, and you put it in, and then you lock this gigantic handle like on a freezer, and then you press the button, and then it hummed, as they do, and it actually had a ding at the end. And so you'd open it up, and the sandwich is hot, and you felt the inside of the oven, and it wasn't hot. And that's scary, right? That's really scary. And then they thought it would make you go blind. They had to convince people it won't make you go blind. In fact, they thought a lot of things would make you go blind over time. But that's been shown not to be true. So anyway, they started making a profit. Well, sure enough, and they obviously patented the transmitter and the handle and everything else. And so they made profits for some period of time. But immediately, other companies, mainly who either produced microwave generators or produced kitchen appliances, immediately went out and bought like 10 of these things, took them back, and you do what's called reverse engineering. You have your engineers take it apart, measure everything, give me blueprints, show me what all the parts are, and then what parts are patented, and then that's all I have to figure out is how to do this part, and then I know how to build them. And today, as you know, the profits are gone. The profits are zero. I mean, graphically, once you have entry coming in, demand declines and becomes more elastic, and you end up with zero economic profits. Today, it's a commodity. You go to Best Buy, and there's a wall full of these things, right? There's a sandwich one for $49, and then a bigger one, and then you have different sizes and everything else. And they're all making about 6% return on investment, which is the standard for that degree of risk in the industry. Who was the company? Korean company. Korean electronics company. Who are they? Huh? No. I can't remember the name of it. They decided they wanted to look at where there is no competition. And nobody was making a big giant one. So they built this thing, and it was big enough to do a turkey, right? Like for a big family and stuff. And they put it on the market. and it just wasn't selling. I mean, they had done surveys, and it looked like there was a big demand for it, and it just wasn't selling. Well, what they didn't realize was in every kitchen, there's a standard distance between the counter and the cabinets. Y'all with me? There's a standard height. If you go to Home Depot or any place that has kitchens, you can see it. They're all the same, right? They had made it 2 inches too tall to fit under the cabinets, and so you could use it, but you had to put it on a cart or something else in that way. And then GE and all these guys already know how to make kitchen appliances, how long to make the cord, what kind of material do you put on the outside that it can be cleaned and won't scratch and do all of these things. So in any case, once competition comes in, you don't have monopoly profits in the long run if firms are able to enter. There is this estimate of what's called an efficiency loss, because you'll notice the firm is not producing where price equals marginal cost, which looks like the intersection of demand and supply. But instead, they're producing a reduced amount and charging a higher price. And so there is this estimate that there's an efficiency loss due to this restriction in output. It is the case in many monopolies all over the world that there are substantial efficiency losses. But once we get into multiple pricing techniques, which we'll talk about after the midterm, price discrimination, I talked a little bit about the paint example when we did elasticity. If you can price discriminate, that efficiency loss goes away because you're able to charge different prices and increase output. So again, sources of monopoly power, barriers to entry. One, you have an absolute cost advantage. We talked about that, falling average cost. Two, you may have a natural monopoly. You may be producing a product where the market will only support one producer. If you think about Thousand Oaks was a planned community. They took this gigantic piece of land and they decided to build a city. And then they went to electric companies and they said, I want you to bid on providing the electricity for these 10,000 homes. So you had to figure out, okay, I have to wire the entire city. Then I have to run lines to every house and put a meter on every house, right? Then I have to do the step down from the grid down to retail. And so those are all my costs of getting started, right? And then you would project what is the flow of profit. You can pretty well estimate demand because you know how much the houses will sell for, so you know what common usage is for a house of that square footage or whatever, and you decide to invest. Once you've done that, no other firm is going to enter the marketplace because they would have to rewire the entire city. Let's say there are 100,000. Let's say there are 50,000 homes. So you've done the calculation. Then if I can sell to 50,000 homes, then it's worthwhile doing, right? But if a second guy comes in, his product is identical to mine, it's electricity, and I would have still that same cost of wiring, but only get half the revenue. And so that's called a natural monopoly. The market will only support one firm. Same is true with natural gas distribution. These are called public utilities, as you know, and they are regulated monopolies by the state, because no two companies will come in. Cable TV, another example of getting the contract for an area wiring the city. There's only one city I think in the United States, where there are two cable companies, and it is San Luis Obispo, California. And the reason is there are two wealthy families that still do run the Ford dealership and the Chevy dealership, and they hate each other. They've been in a feud for like 30, 40, 50 years. They hate each other. They're both wealthy, and they just are competing, and like you can't date anybody in that family, right? You're disowned from the family, and so one of them went into cable, put in a cable system, and the other guy said, I'm going to beat you at this. So he put in another cable system. So the quality is fantastic. The prices are low. They're both losing money. But the reason is they're just out to kill each other, right? You'll go bankrupt before I do. You're going to lose more money than I'm going to lose. And so it's hysterical. That's a natural monopoly. If you have a differentiated product and others cannot produce exactly the same thing, as we talked about before, then that's a potential source of barrier to entry. Bounty has reputational effect of being the absorbent paper towel, and Brawny has the reputational effect of being the strong one. And then we talked about regulatory barriers, patents, copyrights, and licenses. Good. So that's the alternative market structure information.